Hello, Ali. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to talk on Pimprenelle. I'm very pleased to have you. So I'm going to briefly introduce you before we start. So you did a bachelor degree at George Washington University in International Affairs with a minor in German. You also are currently a student for the Master in International and Comparative Education at the University of Oxford. And you also work as an assistant director for placement programs for Cultural Vistas, which is a company that promotes international exchange to connect lives, enhance global skills, and drive positive change. But before we delve more in detail into all of that, could you please introduce yourself in whatever way you'd like?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. I think for me, my career has always been about international exchange because it changed my life so much. I studied abroad in Berlin during my undergrad and in Accra, Ghana. And that experience just really opened my eyes to wanting to see the world. And sometimes it had a little bit more political lens in the beginning, but it very quickly changed to working in education because I really wanted to make it possible for people like me and other people to see the world like I did and to connect with different cultures. So whether it's with Culture Vistas or other companies I've worked at or taking part in exchanges myself like Fulbright or the International Parliamentary Scholarship in Germany, I really have been kind of following a path of international exchange for quite a while now, and really is my free time and my study time and my work time.
Okay, that sounds very inspiring. And so could you please tell us more about your experience in education and your schooling? What type of student were you? Where did you grow up? Because I know that you have both a familiarity with the US and Germany. So are you a dual citizen?
I wish I was a dual citizen.
Okay.
No, not yet. So I just have US citizenship and permanent residency in Germany. And I grew up in the US for the first 21-ish years of my life and did most of my schooling there. I went to a public school in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we just happened to have a native German speaker teaching German, which is very unusual. We were the only German program in my county. And then I left North Carolina to go to George Washington University in DC because I wanted to go see a little bit more of the world, get a little bit more experience, and not stay in North Carolina. It's a beautiful state, but not where I wanted to live long term. And that opened the door to Germany, where I studied abroad and did an internship, and then moved there, and it's been almost 10 years. So most of my schooling has been in the US, but since I work with education in Germany, I also have gained a lot of insights there. I taught for 2 years in German schools and now organize different programs that are usually associated with German schools as well.
And regarding your K through 12 education, so you did it in the US. Did you enjoy it?
I did. I definitely enjoyed my schooling years probably a little bit more than my undergraduate. Not that I didn't love my undergraduate, but I was so ready to work that I did internships throughout my entire undergraduate and then just jumped straight into work, which is what George Washington University is known for. In my schooling years, I was a very type A, straight A student, very focused. And I definitely enjoyed some of the freedom that I got because I was able to kind of complete the work quickly, that I had teachers that really supported me to explore different things. So I took online classes, I took college classes, and I also was part of a business program that helped me to do different internships then. So I really was lucky, even though North Carolina public schools may not be known for the best, to have teachers and have programs that really supported me. But I would say that I definitely had a very different experience than a lot of people my age because I had those freedoms and because I was able to kind of quickly progress through school and they allowed me to do that. So that really helped a lot later on, but it's kind of a trend for me that I try and quickly progress through things and try and get to new opportunities, but maybe go a little bit too fast through it.
Okay, I see. And were your parents what role did they have in your education? Were they supportive? Are they educated?
Yeah, I have very supportive parents. My mother always, pushed me to do my best, but also was definitely a voice of reason of telling me to take a break, have some fun. But both my parents are very highly educated. I'm very lucky in that sense. My dad, much later on in my life, but did get his PhD and is actually a professor and instructor And my mom also got her master's degree and was very educated. And both are more engineering, computer science kind of background.
Okay.
And so when I was pursuing more kind of liberal arts and politics and education, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of like, what do you do and what is your job? But they definitely have been really supportive, even when that's taken me halfway across the world to Germany.
And how did your interest in education and liberal arts like arise? Like what sparked your interest in education and liberal arts?
I think it just showed me what was possible, that, like I said, coming from North Carolina, what I was doing was a little bit unusual, that I was doing more that was beyond the curriculum, that I left North Carolina is quite unusual. And so I saw the doors that it opened to me, that it allowed me to go to Ghana, to Germany, to travel the world, to have internships, to meet people. And so those opportunities really inspired me and really showed me that you can change lives through education, even though there are lots of problems with maybe the system as the whole. I personally saw a lot of benefit of it and wanted to make that possible for others, and enjoyed learning too. I think that's also was always the key for me, that I, in school, that I, always wanted to learn more, do more, see more, and that really made me want to continue to a path where I could continue to learn, and that was encouraged. And that I could also have a little fun doing it.
And so when was your first international exchange?
My first international exchange was in high school. We did a summer after my sophomore year, so I would have been 15. And it was to Germany. And so we did a month-long exchange where we spent a week exploring around Berlin and then 3 weeks living with a host family in Rostock, which is like in the northern part of Germany. So it was my first official exchange, but I also got to travel with my mom. She did work trips to Europe, and so those were my first opportunities. And she always says that it's her fault that I wanted to see the world because I got to do it with her. So, it's definitely travel. It was not, these deep cultural exchanges, but those were definitely my first exposures. And then to have that first opportunity by myself for a month to go and live with a family, that was, I think, definitely a big moment that kind of sparked everything else.
Okay, I understand better. And so can you please tell us more about like your work that you're currently doing at Cultural Vistas, what it consists in, and all of that?
So I am mainly responsible for the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange Program, also known as the Parlamentarisches Patenschaftsprogramm in Germany. It's one of the largest exchange programs between Germany and the United States. About 400 Germans and Americans go and spend a year in the respective countries. And there's a student or a school-aged portion of it. So for like high school age, usually around 16 or 17 to do the year-long exchange. And then there's also the component we call the young professionals. And so that's the component that I'm in charge of. And the young professionals in Germany is defined as those who have participated in vocational education. And that's kind of how I've gotten to know that system quite well. And then on the US side, because the US doesn't have a vocational education system quite like Germany does, it's basically defined as anybody who has a high school diploma and is above 18 years old. And that's it. So there's very little requirements. They're trying to get as the wide breadth of society as they can. So it's not just people that have a university degree. Some of them have no degree. Some of them did do vocation. Some of them have what we call an associate's degree, so just the 2-year community college. So that's kind of the US side. And the idea is that they switch places for a year, or not switch places, but switch countries for a year. And they learn the language for 2 months. They study at a university for a semester, and they have an internship for 5 months at the end. So it's kind of like a life cycle. And I work on running that program, placing that program, and working with my team to make sure that happens. There's also other smaller programs that we do. Almost all of them involve some kind of professional exchange for skill building. So we're not looking at high school exchanges. We're looking at usually some kind of internship component, some type of knowledge exchange that's associated with their jobs or with their career interests. And so almost all the programs that I run have a placement component, which is part of my job, is to place them in different experiences, internships, host families, universities, etc. And then also to make sure that the programs have some kind of skill building professional component.
Okay, I see. And is Cultural Vistas targeting only like vocational students, or are you also like interested into other students like coming from different pathways?
For the program, the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange, only vocational students are allowed to participate. It's a government-sponsored program, and that's the criteria that they give us. But for our other exchange programs, we have everything. We have vocational students. We also have like expert-level professionals, where we'll bring together doctors from around the world and have them exchange on how it is in their field, in their countries. We also have some student exchanges. Like I said, we're usually focusing on some kind of professional component. So it's ranging from college level students or vocational age level students all the way up to experts in their fields, a range of different exchange programs, and trying to kind of create formats that bring people together to build those skills and exchange knowledge.
Okay, I understand. I have a question. I'm trying to find a good way to frame it, but the reason why this specific program is targeting vocational students, is it also trying to make more accessible like international exchange for them, because it's something that they can be very like prevented from due to the fact that they're in educational pathways?
Absolutely, yeah. It's
Okay.
one of the few exchange programs that exists for vocational students. It's one of 3 that I know of. There might be a few
Okay.
other out there, but compared to the hundreds literally that there are for university students, this is one of 3 that I know in Germany, and across Europe. It's also definitely quite unique that it is a government-sponsored program specifically targeted to vocational education students. And exactly as you said, the goal is to provide them an opportunity that they normally wouldn't have. But also, it's so key that they have these opportunities, because you have vocational students that are the backbone of the workforce, that are entering into a global market with global customers, with global citizens, and they have probably never left their town.
Yeah.
And so that's where you're getting these conflicts of, the working class, the backbone of the economy that is so closed-minded to the international changes and to these movements going on. And that is kind of a realization that I think is a trend throughout the years. I mean, the cultural vistas and the program are not new. They were started right after World War II, when there was, the conflict and people misunderstanding each other, and we need to bring people together. And the idea of who do we need to bring together, who could benefit the most from these exchanges, how can we make the most change? And then that was the choice for vocational education to really take a priority for this program.
Okay, I see. I want to delve more into like vocational education in the German system, but before that, I want to ask you something, because I know that you have both an experience in the US and also in Germany, like you know well the school system there. What are the main differences, and according to you, what are like the pros and cons of like each systems?
So there's a lot of differences. The German system is quite unique, and the US system too, but there's many systems that have based on the US system, so I think you see it more. As I mentioned, the German system has much more vocational education focus. I think it's about 40% of the population goes through some sort of vocational education, and that is compared to probably below 10% in the United States, where it is much more common to take the traditional path, and there is elementary, middle, and high school. You complete high school, you get your high school diploma, and then you apply for university. This is a very set path and very common path that people take. And I also say that the US system is definitely more focused on academic achievement, standardized testing, and all of these things. Not to say that Germany doesn't have those, but I think that that's kind of the main focus of the United States, is we want to have the brightest minds achieving the greatest things and going on to change the world. We can get into how that might create some issues, but I think that's their logic. Whereas the German system is much more trying to kind of, I think, meet people where they're at, is where they're trying to sell, is that, we're not trying to force people through a system, even though there are people that are forced through pathways in the system that exist now, but they're trying to at least create different pathways, create different opportunities. And that's where you get the vocational system that runs kind of parallel to the traditional, using American terms, high school system, Gymnasium, as they say in Germany. And you make this decision, though, at around 10 years old in the 4th grade. Up until that point, you're in an elementary school. And the elementary schools in Germany are much more like playtime than school. If you're comparing it to the US system, they're very much focused on kind of more holistic person building and not pushing learning all of the different, things until the fourth grade. But then they also make this decision in the fourth grade, okay, we're going to take a test now, and you're going to make a decision on whether you're going to take the vocational path or whether you're going to take the academic path. And this is where, again, you have options, but you do see a clear divide of people going and maybe being forced into the different options that are available. And so I think that that's one of the biggest differences, where the US kind of maybe pushes people through one option that, this is the path and everyone shall take it, even though it may not be the best fit for you. And Germany has two, or actually multiple if you really want to get in deep into it, but still people are then being pushed into separate paths, which can maybe divide them a little bit or give them an opportunity to grow and to explore something that they wouldn't get to if they were in the US system. And I can't imagine, I was a very classic student, so the US system worked for me, but there's so many people that struggle to keep up with the expectations of the US system and then graduate with a diploma or even finish college and realize, I don't want to do this. Like, I want to work in an industry where I can use my hands, where I can, fix things, where I can interact with people more, and then they have to start all over or find a different path. And at least in Germany, you have this system that allows you early on to, not waste your time, I would say, with, if I'm going to be a mechanic, do I really need to know the in-depth history of, East Asia? Probably not. And so why, force that and let them have that opportunity?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's like at the same time a benefit for Germany to have all of those options. I think there's 4, if I'm not mistaken, like, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that well.
Yeah.
Hauptschule, Realschule, Gymnasium, and then
Gesamtschule, yeah. So as Germany's begun to realize that their two-pathway system doesn't exactly work, there's been reforms in how the schools are structured. And that's where you get all of these different schools. So the Gesamtschule, which you mentioned at the end, is actually a somewhat newer development where they are combining the pathways within one school. And so they're still separate pathways, but at least they're within the same school, which allows them to change between pathways a lot easier and still interact with their peers. Because one of the biggest things is you've got 10-year-olds that are like, I'm never going to see my best friends again because they're going off to this different school. All of my friends are going here. I want to go there. And so at least if you're having them in the same school, you're getting that social anxiety of this, I'm never going to see my friends again. And the social division that happens when you have these separate pathways is reduced. So that's the Gesamtschule, which is coming along in different country or different counties and different states are adopting that. And then, you have the Hauptschule, which is basically just like the lower level degree or lower level diploma. That doesn't necessarily lead into a vocational school. So you do have the option to just kind of do the basic path and then stop, or do the basic path and then decide which way you go, but it's much harder. You have to take a lot more tests and things like that. And then, the Realschule, the real school, I find it quite interesting. The translation goes into vocational education because it's like real life, you're real working. So the Realschule goes to vocational, and then the Gymnasium is the typical university pathway.
Okay, in France we have something similar with like professional pathways, but it happens like later than in Germany. It happens around like 14, 15. But the problem with like this path is the value that it has in society. Like people often look down upon those pathways because they're seen as like less legitimate or less good than like the academic one. How is it in Germany? Is it like also looked down upon?
A little bit, yeah. We definitely have those stereotypes. They exist everywhere, and it's definitely unfortunate, especially because you do have such a large part of society that are going through these different programs. Different European countries, as you mentioned, France has them, but I think it's a much smaller portion of society that does go through vocational education. But I think that there are efforts to change that. And one of them, at least in my opinion, is also to increase the opportunities that you have when you go in vocational education, just like having exchange programs. Like those make it, they elevate that experience. They elevate the image of it. If you say like, I am studying to be a baker and I went to France to study baking as well, like it elevates that. Just like when you say, I studied abroad at Sciences Po or Oxford or went to the United States, all of those things elevate the experience. And so that's just my niche example, but there are efforts to do that. And I think it also goes a little bit through waves, as once the economy kind of gets a little bit worse and people realize you can make great money in these jobs. Like these are really solid, stable income that is always needed. And so then you see a little bit of kind of raising in respect as people realize, oh, like my job is maybe not as stable as what they have. Maybe I should have taken that career.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Yeah, that makes sense. I was about to ask you, like, how do we shift this, like, a perception on those pathways? But that makes sense. I think adding values to it and like promoting like international exchanges, because in France, like, it's not it's not possible. I mean, international exchange in France is also not something very common. But something I wanted to ask you too, because you touched a little bit on like the ideology driving educational system in Germany and in the US. Do you think that this impacts the notion of success and failure, like in those countries' educational system, and how are they different?
I think so. In the US, as I mentioned, like success is academic achievement. It's getting the straight A's, getting into the best colleges and things like that. And I think that that's definitely less in Germany, that it's this less of this drive to get the best grades and achieve the best outcomes, because you also have a lot of different views and different systems. Like there are great universities in Germany, but it's not like in the US where you have the Harvards and the Yales. It is very much, it's free education. It's much more open access and equitable, that it's not as hard to get into university into Germany. And so it's not necessarily seen as this great achievement when you get in. It's still something to celebrate, but it's not as this kind of celebrated thing in the United States. And so that is definitely something that's reflected in German society, where they have this balance of working hard. The Germans are known for that, but it's also this respect for your free time, for your peace of mind, and for your enjoyment of your life, that is not all about this great success and always pushing farther and harder, that you can enjoy it where it is. And I think that's reflected in the school system as well as just in the daily life. And so the defining success in Germany definitely has the aspects of academic success and getting a good job, but I think people define it also of having a balanced life is successful. And in the US, I think that balance is definitely missing. It's one of the main reasons that I like to live in Germany, this respect for balance that I see at a lot of different levels. And it definitely is something that I needed in my life when I was in the United States and found when I went to Germany.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I never put those words onto those dynamics, but I definitely see that like in the US, it's like education is really a market. And it's really like there's a lot of competition, and it's a lot about status. Like attending Harvard or Yale or Ivy League school is very prestigious and very praised. And it's true that like even in France, I mean, there's like elitist institutions, but it's we have free education as well, and we respect that a lot. But as I was speaking with people from the US also, I was asking them like, what, according to you, are the like positive aspect of having such an expensive higher educational system? I mean, they might be obvious, like more like resources and allocation and everything. But so for you, what are like the pros and cons of like, I mean, yeah, no, you actually just mentioned that, but I would say like the free educational system, because in France or universities, like one of the main problem is like that there's a lot of students in those free universities, and often, for example, there's not even a seat for every of them. It's complicated sometimes to like just have a relationship with the teacher, and I feel that this lack of money basically can also hinder like the learning of many students.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I agree. It's definitely a tough balance. I think also that you need to think about the variety of students that are taking part in the programs, that some of them might have different goals and different learning styles, and those are not exactly possible to support in that kind of system. But I also think that those people may not have had found success in the US either, where they have all the support systems that, not all, but they have a lot of support systems, but they still may not have made it there. And so, is it more important to break down barriers of access and for that to sacrifice maybe the support within the system? Or is it more important to have higher barriers to access, but then be able to support those that make it through those barriers? And I go back and forth a lot on that. I definitely prefer the experience of the US education. I did my undergraduate there, and I chose not to study in Germany for my master's. I came to the UK, which is not the US, but definitely similar kind of structures and support systems in the university, because that was important to me. But I also see the benefits of having the German system open for so many people to take part in. And I think that they do encourage, even from a young age in the German education system, taking initiative yourself and finding the resources and finding your pathway. And so I think if you instill that mindset early on, then you do have success in navigating the complicated system and the less support structures of the German university. But I think that it's maybe a balance that needs to be had. I think that, honestly, in my opinion, it's great, but they only pay like 200 euros a semester, and for that they get free transportation and discounted food, and they get access to classes. I know that's almost too cheap for me. Like, I do not want to go anywhere near the thousands and thousands that we pay in the United States or even here in the UK. But I think there could be a happy medium to at least get, you know, a little bit higher to get additional support systems. But that's kind of where my Americanness still shines through a little bit. And also the wanting to find a happy medium between the German and the US, that there's no ideal, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Also, one problem that we have in France, and I don't know if it's happening too in Germany, is that like teachers are not like well paid, and professors also at the universities, but teachers in general. And the value of the teacher and the perception that society have of them is like respected, because it's a very like moral type of job and ethical, but it's not really praised or looked like as if they were doctors or everything. Whereas like in Finland, for example, it's like very, very like valued and praised. Is it the same in Germany?
I think it actually varies from region to region a little bit, and some of that has to do with the way that teachers are paid and employed, that some states actually have them as Verbeamtete, how am I going to translate that they are protected employees of the state. And so they have lots of different protections and pensions, and are seen as government employees almost. And that's only in certain states though, and I think those that have that protection see that as a very strong pull to want to be teachers, or also recognition that they are not just, you know, these teachers employed by schools that are indispensable, that they are, you know, government protected employees. And so that they then get a little bit more respect and better pay, and like I said, the protections of retirement and things like that. Whereas in Berlin, where I live, they are not part of the government employee system. They are just regular employees of any school. And that is definitely a big complaint of teachers there, that they are not being recognized for their work, not being protected for what they have to go through. And especially in a big city like Berlin, where you have a lot of social issues and a lot of pressure being put on the students and the teachers to react to different demographics, to the constantly changing population in Berlin. There's a lot of coming and going and new students coming in every year, and changing those dynamics, that there's not that recognition and support. But since Germany's education system is very state-based, and you also see a big culture change between the South and the North and the East and the West, that plays a role in how teachers are seen and paid and valued. But I think overall it's quite still a respected position. But also you still see that teachers in gymnasium and the academic path are more respected than those in the vocational education system. So it even goes beyond just the students that are in those types of schools, but also to the teachers.
That's very interesting. And so you feel like, to shift this perception that we have in society of teachers, like the pay and the pay is like a factor that you take into consideration, like their salary?
I think it's less about for how much they're paid, but again, this protection of the status of them, that if they are protected employees, they can't just be fired, that there are different rules that allow, protect their working conditions, that protect their sick leave and that protect their retirement and all these things. And so I think that I don't know if it changes the perception some maybe, but I think it definitely makes the teachers feel more valued and more safe in their positions, that they know that if they need to approach something, if they need to say something, if they want to change something, that they're protected and not like, oh, you trying to change the system, we're just get another teacher. I think that is something that changes their perception of themselves and how they feel in their jobs. But I don't honestly know how much the pay difference is between those that are beamtet, that are in the state system, versus those that are employed regularly. I think that is something kind of state by state that is determined, but I don't know too much about the actual pay differences.
Okay, yeah, no, I see. I think it's very interesting because, yeah, in France, like, although they're very protected by the government, because all of the teachers, professors, if it's not a private institution, are protected by the government. But the fact that you mentioned before that, like the salary aspect, made me realize also that the fact that they're so underpaid in France, like, might influence a lot the perception. Because I feel like the jobs that are kind of praised also are often the ones who are well paid, if I can say so.
Yeah. But when you have all of them that are protected, it's different than in Germany, where you only have some. Where if you have,
I feel it's
and like that, like if everybody in Germany was protected, and then I think that salary might play a bigger role. But because they're not all protected, I think from what I've kind of perceived, and especially looking at the discourse in Berlin, where they are not protected, that this is something that they've been fighting for and really even protesting for a while, is something that is more valued almost than the higher pay, because that security is something that really can make a huge difference in how they do their work even, and not just in how much they're paid for it.
I'm wondering also, I guess the German school system, I don't know actually, is it decentralized or centralized?
Decentralized.
Decentralized. And so decentralized also sometimes, not all the time, but involves like a more pedagogical autonomy. Do you feel that there's because you teach also, like you taught in the German system?
Yeah.
So did you feel that you had a pedagogical autonomy?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I taught in elementary school and in a gymnasium, 1 year each in Berlin. And I think that there's definitely quite a bit of flexibility in what you're teaching. I think that while it is decentralized, it's still very much regulated at the state level. So the state is telling you, what you're supposed to teach, but it's different from state to state. And so the states can kind of decide on what approach they want to take that fits best for them, ideally. And I think that's where you do see a lot of different flexibility, and where they'll talk about autonomy. And also in the German curriculum, that it's very much sent of like, this is what you need to accomplish. How you get there, kind of up to you. And so there is that freedom, but it's also a burden for teachers, I feel like, a lot of times, that, they have this end goal, but they are supposed to figure out how they're supposed to get there. It can definitely be a different kind of style and attractive, but also can be a burden that they have to bear. And so I see both sides of it, but the German system definitely does pride themselves on having the state rights, the state focus on education, also similar to the US a little bit. It has a little bit more centralized government autonomy at the higher levels in the US, but there's also this idea that states have different needs and different focuses.
Okay, and what is the teachers' formation like? Are they trained in like pedagogy? And do they have to like have also a mastery of pedagogy and their topic, or is it like more emphasized on the topic, like the subject?
I think that there's definitely emphasis on the subject, more so than I would like to see. And I think also that there's very limited training throughout their careers. And that's also where you're seeing lots of problems, where you're having an aging of teachers that have not been trained for many years, and not only in pedagogy, but also in their topics of subject. But in the German system, they have to be certified in 2 different subjects, and they are certified not only for the age group, but also for the type of school that they teach at. So whether they're teaching at a gymnasium, whether they're teaching at Realschule, Hauptschule, Gesamtschule, whatever, those are all different kinds of certifications. So they are focusing somewhat on the types of students and the style of teaching in each of those different types of schools. So that is, at least I see, a positive. that obviously a gymnasium teacher is not going to teach the same way as a Realschule teacher, even if they're both teaching English or history or whatever, that there are different needs and perspectives and teaching styles that are expected, and that is shown in how they are educated as teachers, that they have to specialize in not only the subject but the type of school that they're teaching at. But I would say that it's definitely, in typical university fashion, much more focused on subject matter and much more focused on the kind of academic side of things and less on the practicals of pedagogy. How do I teach this? What do I need to know for that? But Germany also has the Referendariat, which I think is pretty common, where you're basically like an assistant teacher for a year or two after you've done your actual studies. And I think that's where they expect you to learn a lot of the pedagogy is kind of on the job and to have those kind of year, sometimes 2 years, depending on the state and the subject, where you're learning about how these things are taught.
I feel it's very complicated to expect teachers to have like a lot of pedagogical autonomy, but not really training them about like pedagogy as a field. Because like in Finland, like, okay, teachers have a lot of like pedagogical autonomy, but they're also researcher and trained like to be researcher into pedagogy, and pedagogy is as important as like the subject they're teaching. So I feel it makes a huge difference. It's like so important, and we actually have the exact same issue in France, where like most of the teachers have no idea about what is pedagogy. They even, I think, don't consider it as like a field or as something that could be multiple. It's like, well, pedagogy is just about like transmitting knowledge. There's no multiple ways, like, you know, whether like in the US, my educational formation, I've learned so many different pedagogical styles and how to adapt depending on the students. So I feel like, it's a burden. Pedagogical autonomy is a burden if you're not trained in pedagogy. But if you are, it can be very great. So
and also is something interesting as well. In Germany, being a teacher is an academic path, so you go through the gymnasium and whatever. But for the younger years, even in some elementary school contexts, they'll have a teacher, and then they have an Erzieher, which is like an assistant. It's its own job within the school that is working on the formation of a child, their physical mind and body. And that is a vocational path. And in the vocational path, when you are studying to be an Erzieher, when you're studying to be in this pathway, you are learning much more about how do you pedagogy, but for much more younger formations. But it's still pedagogy. It's a little bit of child development combined with pedagogy, combined with everything else that you need to know. But that is a dual kind of role in the younger schools, in the elementary schools, and in the kindergartens, where they have teachers, but they also have Erzieher that are responsible more for this formation. And I see that role and that job is a much more practical focus on how are we teaching them, what are we doing, what are the methods. But they're also not expected to teach academic subjects. They're not expected to necessarily transfer knowledge, as you say. They're more there to assist in the growth and caring of the child. But that's only in the much younger years. But that's vocational and then more practically focused.
That's very interesting. It made me wonder, like, is a child-centered pedagogy looked bad upon, like in Germany? Because I know that in France, it's really something that is looked bad upon when it's too student-centered, and they really favor this type of traditional pedagogy where like the teacher is like the master and the students are ignorant, like very Paulo Freire, like banking model vibes. Is it the same in Germany?
Not as much, no. Okay. I don't think so. It's a classroom. You're still always going to have the teacher up front and the students sitting there. But I think that there is definitely a much more respect for the autonomy of the student and for them kind of guiding their learning, and that it's their responsibility and not necessarily the teacher's the almighty kind of knowledge at the front of the classroom. That they do see that more than I was expecting, I would say, because Germany is quite hierarchical in their social structures and in their work structures. But I see efforts, especially with children, to give them that autonomy and that confidence to take charge of their own learning a little bit more, and to explore a little bit beyond the basics of let's read a textbook and copy down what it says. That there is definitely a critical thinking focus and things like that, especially in the gymnasium areas. but that hierarchy also, I think if you were to walk into a classroom, you would still always see the teacher up front and the students in their seats. But I think that there is at least an ethos, there is a kind of movement, a philosophical kind of perspective behind it that students have more say.
Okay, I understand. I have one question that just came to my mind because I remember you mentioned this in class and I thought it was really interesting. We were talking about like how to teach about the Holocaust, but especially how to teach about like sensitive topic. And I think this is such an interesting topic that I'm still like trying to grapple with. So what do you think about the ways in which like the history of the Holocaust is being taught in Germany?
Complicated.
Yeah, I know. It's not an easy one at all.
I think that Germany is praised, and rightfully so, for trying to not hide the past and what happened, and to make it an important part of curriculum, and also to respect that students are, I don't know if it's smart enough, but they're mature enough at even younger ages to have conversations about these kinds of things. And so it's not this topic that is, everybody, it's hushed whispers and nobody talks about it, and then all of a sudden you're in 10th grade and you go take a deep dive. It's a very gradual process, and I respect that a lot, that they had the kind of foresight to trust students with that information at a younger age. But I also see a lot of different problems with the teaching of it, and that it's also still, while they will never forget, I don't see that necessarily taking as action of kind of preventative moving forward. So you do have, these campaigns of Nie wieder, never again, that you'll see everywhere as slogans kind of all over the place, because that is the saying that Germany has had for decades now, of that, we take responsibility for what happened and it will never happen again. But I see we take responsibility for what happened. I don't know that I see that it will never happen again. And that's, I think, where you have this remembrance culture, that thinking about when everybody knows what happens and we know that Germany is responsible for it. But what does that mean for today? Like, what we understand the story, we have the lines, we know what to say, we know our role, but what do we do? And again, how do we translate that into living in a society where it is actually never again? And that critical thinking aspect is missing in a pure history of Germany and the Holocaust.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I think like the ways in which we teach about that is so crucial. I remember in my education, at least, like they showed us very violent movies. And it made me just more depressed than thinking about it as in a critical manner. And I feel that often the way in which we teach histories, at least in France, like the way in which history is taught is very factual. And the meaning behind it, where do we want to go, and the critical aspect of it is often like not really talked about or enhanced and fostered. That leads me to the following question, which is like, could you tell us about your own research that you're doing right now in the context of the master in Oxford?
Yeah, so I'm looking at.
If you want, because you have the sun in your face, I don't want to.
It's okay.
I can
just
move
rotate around the room.
Yes. Just yeah.
There you go. So for my research, I wanted to delve deeper into vocational education, because I started working on this exchange program where vocational education students have the opportunity to go abroad. And while I think that's great, and I am so excited that this program exists and it is such a joy to work on, it also exposed me to some of the deeper issues that you have in vocational education. And so I wanted to look at the experience of vocational education in intercultural learning. And it's taken many different forms and different perspectives, because originally I was thinking about the large influx of migrants into Germany in since 2015. And many of these people are getting pushed or lightly guided to take vocational education as a pathway, because it is something that's needed in Germany. There's a lot of empty spaces and a lot of jobs that are needed to be filled for the aging workforce. and it's also seen as the less academic path and therefore hopefully less difficult. And so people coming in with language difficulties that maybe are not as qualified, you can easily show them the pathway of vocational education. A lot of different issues to unpack there. We're thinking about society and discrimination and segregation even. That is absolutely a topic that I wish I could delve more into. But as I was diving into it, I was starting to realize that all of these programs are there to help migrants integrate into vocational education systems and to teach them how to survive in the German system. But why are we not looking at the German system to see, is there maybe an opportunity here to improve it so that it is open and accessible to everybody, and in the end improves the experience of everybody as well? Because we're an international world. We're not educating in vocational education students anymore for bakers and mechanics that are only going to be working with German customers. We're working with also the hundreds of thousands of people that have come to Germany over the past decade. And before that, in Germany is a multicultural, intercultural society. It's time that vocational education reflects that. And so I'm looking at, in vocational education, is there, and if so, how are they integrating intercultural education concepts into the curriculum? How is it being taught? How is it being received? With the lens of, is it not only improving the experience of migrants in the education, but also is it improving the intercultural skills and hopefully the ability for Germans to work in an international intercultural environment? That it's not just the migrants that need the support to learn how to navigate the German system. The Germans need to learn how to navigate an international world and international workforce. So it's beneficial to everybody if we're integrating intercultural concepts and intercultural learning into the basic curriculum so that everybody can then get to a level where we can communicate, interact with each other that is so necessary today. So that's the start of where I'm at, of trying to first break apart the curriculum and looking at the different approaches to intercultural learning, what is out there that could be integrated. And then the next step is going to be to talk to teachers, to talk to students, both Germans and migrant students, to see if they have the experience with these concepts, if they think they would be helpful, and also where they're at right now in their journey. Because through the education programs that I run, the international exchanges, I definitely see that vocational education students struggle with intercultural exchange programs, that they are definitely going into uncharted territory in many ways, and that they don't necessarily have the skills that some of their peers might have that have gone through the university pathway to really discern and critically think and to have this empathy for different cultures because of lack of exposure and because they may not have ever been taught to do that or prioritize that. And so hopefully we'll find that these concepts are helpful, but I think the key is how do we integrate it and what concepts, because this is not an academic classroom. These are, it's a vocational education. It's very different structure of learning and different styles of teaching. And so adding just another class on intercultural communication or intercultural concepts is not going to work. You need to show the value and the skills that are needed and not just this abstract of empathy for other cultures. That's not something that you can just add into vocational education.
I see what you mean. Totally, because in France it's different, of course, but the professional pathways often are minoritized students, often coming from immigration. We also have this issue where they're very segregated. And there's in France, and this is also my next question, in France, we don't have a policy of culturally relevant pedagogy. We're very under this umbrella of universalism, where we don't look at where you come from, but we see you as a human being before everything. And so it often prevents teacher from addressing cultural conflicts. I'm not saying that culture is a conflict, but saying that not addressing it creates conflict. So would you say that in Germany currently the politics regarding the integration of immigrants within Germany is more about assimilation? I mean, from what I can understand, it is, rather than being culturally relevant and really integrating them. It's more they have to integrate to us, but we're not trying to integrate them. It's not coming both ways.
Exactly. And I see that a lot. And I think that that is, it's unfortunate that we have this mindset, and a lot of people, when you sell it to them, it's like, oh, we have to change for them. It's like, no, like you're changing for you, because this is the world that we're living in now, that we're not living in a world that we are isolated and have just our little bubble of our culture with our people. We are living in a world that we are so interconnected, and the migrants have realized this, because they chose to move and to come to a different country, or sometimes were forced to, and they've had to adapt and they've had to learn. They see the necessity of having to change, not just for them, but for the success of where they're coming to. And I think that Germans don't see that. They see that, oh, you're making me change to accommodate them. Like, that's an inconvenience to me. They should change to accommodate me. They're coming to my country. And I think that that's a dangerous mindset, that is perpetuated in a lot of senses also in politics. Whereas if we change it of, I'm not changing for them, I'm changing because this is the world that we live in, that I want to be successful, not that they're successful, that I want to be successful. And so therefore I need these skills, I need this mindset. But I think that it is coming slowly in Germany, that they're realizing this. I think that the problem, though, is we do have a far-right movement that is gaining force in Germany. We just had elections a week or two ago, and about a fifth of the population voted for the far-right political party. And the second, the most popular party was the Christian Democrats, which are center-right. So still democratic and still in the center, but definitely a right movement, after we had a government for the past couple of years that was much more liberally focused, much more socially focused, with the Greens and with the Social Democrats. And so you definitely see that the country is getting frustrated. And the topics were also migration was a huge topic in the election, and that this frustration is not being addressed properly, that it's being fueled more to try and get a rise out of people and to try and get votes, instead of trying to maybe take a different approach and see if we can change people's minds that way.
Yeah, I feel it's very hard, because like education plays such an important role into like a society cohesion and like a general atmosphere, I would say. And like when migrants especially are not like well treated and are like discriminated against in so many ways, like at the structural but also at the social levels. And then, of course, it has a negative impact in society. But then people are like, oh, it's because they came and it's because they're here. It's because of migration. And they don't really see, I feel like, this structural like problem generally. And so, yeah, that's very problematic. And we have the exact same in France.
Yeah, I fear that these problems are all around the world.
Yes, they are.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like history is cyclical, and we're all not that different from each other. This is
Exactly.
what I have learned the more that I have traveled and the more that I have explored, is that you see these trends coming through history, and you see the same problems around the world.
Yeah.
But I see that not as a negative. You would think if we had the same problem all around the world that we could maybe find some solutions somewhere. But I also see it as a sign, again, we're not that different from each other, that we're all connected, that these problems are not isolated, that, you know, because we are not these isolated countries anymore. Yes, of course, if Germany has that problem, France is going to have that problem, and the US is even going to have that problem, because we're all connected. We're all feeding off of each other. We're all building off of each other. And so, yeah, we're going to have the same problems. But I would hope that if we all have the same problem, then we can tell that it's not people that, like, it's not the individual people that are changing the system that's the problem. It's not the migrants that are the problem. It's the system.
Yeah.
But the system's a lot harder to change.
Of course. I have a question I'm wondering about, because in France, like the discourses around education, at least on a more governmental level and political level, is very framed around this idea of like meritocracy, about the fact that like, oh, you can, if you work, you will have it. Like you can access whatever, like just a matter of efforts. I know that like it's not really common. I feel less common in the UK, in the US. I mean, maybe in the US a little bit more, but like I feel it's something very like prevalent into the French educational system. So what would you say like in Germany is like kind of the political governmental discourse around education? Like, what are the values that kind of frame it?
I think that, as I mentioned, Germany is less focused on this high-level achievement. They are definitely focused on kind of gaining a strong societal base of the breadth of education. I think is important to them. That the kind of access to everybody, again, access in the sense of that they all have a path that they can choose, and that way that they're approaching it, instead of the kind of the meritocracy in the US is like everybody needs to achieve the greatest kind of pathway, is that there needs to be this access to everybody, that everybody feels like that they have a place where they can succeed and study. Again, we're talking ideals, we're talking values. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily practically how it is implemented, but I do see that hope in that they are trying to do this kind of generalized acceptance of education for everyone. And you see that also in Germany, for example, in like the PISA tests. Germany is quite poor in those. They also don't like to take part in international rankings at the university level or at the school level. So they do not submit data to a lot of those, and they tend to hold themselves out of those, because I don't think Germany is trying to be number one all around. I'm sure there's some people in Germany that would love to be number one all around, and some politicians that would love to wave that flag. But I think in general, Germany is not trying to do that. They're really trying to have a strong base and a breadth of education, instead of having these kind of peaks of being the top of that and having the smartest. I think it's much more of, we want to have, we want to have hardworking, we want to have educated people, but that are kind of contributing to the German economy. Like, these are the rhetorics that you're seeing. But I don't know that you would hear many German politicians saying that we have the smartest and the brightest in Germany, even though I think that they do have a lot of extremely high achieving, and you see that you see that in the inventions that have come out of Germany, the economy in Germany, but it's not this push to be elite. I think it's a much more a push to be strong and to be established and to be a base that you can build off of effectively.
Okay, yeah, I see. It's always interesting to see the gap between like the institutional discourses and like the reality.
Yeah,
always very complicated and but interesting. My last question, although I think we can kind of read between the lines what you just said, but if there's only one thing, could be teacher formation, content, whatever, one thing you could change in like the German educational system and one thing you could change into the US system, what would they be and why?
I think for both of them, it's going to be to adopt a middle ground, as I had mentioned earlier. Like for the US, there needs to be a more variety of opportunities beyond just the university, because not only is the university path so expensive and so detrimental to not only the wallets, but I feel like also to the formation of many young people. I think that it's so needed. That I love education, I love universities, but not everybody needs to go to university. I don't think that. And so I wish that the US would have more appreciation and openness and more possibilities for students. And I see students doing that on their own, where you have people realizing that you can save a lot of money by going to community college for a year or two and not doing the full 4-year experience. And I'm so glad that that's being taken advantage of, but that's not something that the government proposed. It's not something that's systemic. That's something that I think that has just become a trend that people realized. So I think for me, that's what I wish, that there'd be a variety of more opportunities beyond university to get a good education and to learn about what you want to learn about in the US. And then for Germany, yeah, if we're looking at vocational education system, I wish that there was more intercultural learning and more national opportunities. If you're looking at the education system as a whole, though, I do wish that the choice that they're forced to make in 10 years old at 4th grade, that there is more a Gesamtschule approach, that there is more a combined school approach, that is something that starts to take fruit, and the benefits are shown in that. I hope that that is a solution for Germany, because I don't think you need to get rid of these pathways. I don't think that that's the path either. I think that there's a lot of strength in those, and I appreciate the pathways that are there, but when and how you make that decision and the consequences of it, I think need to be adjusted. And I see that. I see that there are slowly more combined schools coming. Berlin did a huge revamping of their education system a few years ago and is now focusing on combining schools. And I see the benefits in that, and hope that that moves forward and that there truly are long-term benefits. It's an experiment, though. It is all kind of uncharted territory a little bit, but I think that's the change that I hope continues.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting when you say that like in this way, because sometimes I mean, recently I was reading a book about like the history of children in like France especially, but I realized that like the sciences of education is something that is relatively new in the history of humanity. And so it makes me feel hopeful. I'm like, okay, we're at the beginning. It's like, you know, we're working towards something better. Often we see it as like, it looks like there's nothing we can do, but then when I look at history, I'm like, well, it's relatively new. Before it was mostly like religious education and only for elite people, and this like huge and global education is relatively new. So it gives me hope. But your insights were very interesting, and I love this conversation. So yeah, I was very pleased to have you, and thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been lovely talking with you.
Thank you.